Live from New York, I'm Aisha Tanzim and you're watching Access Point. Hello and welcome. Leaders from 193 members of the UN have gathered in New York this week for the UN General Assembly session. The Prime Minister of Pakistan finished his address to the General Assembly about an hour and a half ago. Let's listen to a couple of key points he made. The most anticipated was his comment about drones. He promised Pakistanis that he will raise it in the UN, and he did.
The use of armed drones in the border areas of Pakistan is a continued violation of our territorial integrity. It results in casualties of innocent civilians and is detrimental to our resolve and efforts to eliminate extremism and terrorism from Pakistan. I have urged the United States of America to cease these strikes so that we could avert further casualties and suffering.
The Pakistani Prime Minister also mentioned his upcoming meeting with the Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. That's poised to happen Sunday morning. He said that he's looking forward to build on the Lahore Accord. He had signed that with India in '99 before General Pervez Musharraf ousted him and sent him into exile. Moving to the western border, he talked about supporting peace in Afghanistan and denied the charge that Pakistan's interfering in Afghanistan.
I assured President Karzai that we do not wish to interfere in Afghanistan's internal affairs, nor do we have any favorites in that country. In fact, we have an earnest hope that the Afghans themselves will unite for peace, prosperity, and development of their great country.
Prime Minister Sharif called Pakistan a responsible nuclear weapons state, said Pakistan will continue the goals of disarmament and non-proliferation. But he also mentioned something quite interesting. Pakistan has often complained about the US-India nuclear deal and demanded the same for itself. So this time, Mr. Sharif has raised it in the UN.
By the same token, as a mainstream partner in the global non-proliferation regime, Pakistan has impeccable credentials to join the multilateral export control regime, including the Nuclear Supplies Group.
And then there was also a mention of his government's economic agenda and challenges, and he condemned the attacks on a Christian church in Peshawar. So let me introduce my guests for today. Joining me in our New York studios is Absar Alam. He's a very senior journalist and analyst from Pakistan. He has his own TV show called Bottom Line on Aaj TV. And from the Council on Foreign Relations Studios in Washington, we have Daniel Marquis, a renowned South Asia expert and a frequent guest on our shows. Gentlemen, welcome to Access Point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Absar, starting with you, we'll take what the Prime Minister said in his speech. We'll put it in the context of US-Pakistan relationship going forward. Drones have been a contentious issue between the two countries for a long time. What impact will it have raising it in the UN?
Well, number one, as you just said, that it was a promise by Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif back home that he will take up this issue, because in Pakistan this is a serious issue, and most of the people believe that the wave of terrorism in Pakistan, one of the main reason is these drone attacks, although there are other opinions as well. But one section of society, many political parties, and a large number of voters who have voted Sharif into power, they believe that drones are the reason for this terrorism. So that's why he had promised that until he starts an action against these militants, this will not be successful until drone attacks are stopped. And also, it has a connotation with the context of US law here, which is not very clear on drone attacks, whether it's a violation of Pakistan's sovereignty or not.
So you raise a very interesting point about talking with the Taliban. Let's come to that a little later. Dan, I want to come to you. Does it change anything on the US side? Will raising it in the UN change the US calculus in any way?
I don't think it changes anything markedly. I think here in Washington, people were anticipating that this issue would be raised precisely because Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif has said that he would do it, has promised he would do it, and is under political compulsion back at home to do it. But it doesn't change the calculation here. Certainly within the White House, as far as I understand it, drones are still seen as being one of a very tiny number of options that they have for dealing with the problem of international terrorism based along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. And yes, it's clear that Nawaz Sharif has said these things, but what would follow after it is not any more clear now than it was before he said it at the UN.
Dan, if Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif goes ahead and talks to the Taliban, as he's said that he intends to do, will there be any change? Could there be a rolling back of drone attacks, not as frequent maybe?
Well, there's a way to try to see a kind of a coordination, a potential for coordination between Washington and Islamabad, Rawalpindi, on the use of drones as a bit of a stick with talks as a carrot. You can imagine a situation where Nawaz Sharif would be able to try to pull something like that off, promising that the drones would be used less as long as talks went forward. But there's no evidence, as far as I know, that the U.S. government is willing to go along with that particular game. It is the sort of thing that he'd want to raise on his next visit to the United States in October.
And that visit is coming up on the 23rd of October. He's going to meet President Obama. Absar, if the government goes ahead with the talks with the Taliban, do you think that it'll be under pressure to tell the U.S. to stop the drone strikes? And why should the U.S. listen?
It's not under pressure. Actually, this is a question on Pakistan's sovereignty, because the U.S. is continuously violating Pakistan's sovereignty through these drone attacks. So that's why there's a huge public opinion against these attacks. I respect what Dan said, but I think this is a good step by Pakistan, not only as a political compulsion of Sharif back home to raise it up in the United Nations, but it will put a question mark on what U.S. is doing with other countries, and whether United Nations is the right platform to stop U.S. if it is violating the sovereignty of any other country or not.
Now, I understand the point about violating sovereignty, and that's been raised again and again. What President Obama has said is he uses drones where other options are not feasible, not doable. Pakistan would not want another bin Laden-like raid to go in after key al-Qaeda leaders, and the Pakistani government is unable to control those territories. There's constant allegation of safe havens. So what are other countries to do?
Right, but what other options are with Pakistan? Shall Pakistan continue to close its eyes on what U.S. is doing, whether it should not pursue the international community to stop these drone attacks? Because as I mentioned, maybe these drone attacks are must in as far as U.S. interests are concerned, but those drone attacks are continuously stoking violence in Pakistan. And if Pakistan is taking action by itself against those elements which are being targeted through these drone attacks, I don't think U.S. will have any excuse to violate the sovereignty. We cannot just brush under the carpet this issue of sovereignty. There was no written agreement between the two countries for these drone attacks. So that's a major point. Pakistan has been asking the U.S. to give drone technology to Pakistan so that it could use it. But if U.S. is having a list of certain wanted people, and it keeps ticking that list that we have taken out so and so many people, it's good for them, not for the country, not for the sovereignty of Pakistan, and also the blowback
in Pakistan.
Blowback in Pakistan, and only Pakistanis are suffering, not anybody else.
This question of sovereignty, Dan, until the last government, the U.S. government insisted, at least in background briefings, that this was not a violation of sovereignty. They said, well, yes, they deny the drones in public, but behind closed doors, they've given us permission. Has that rolled over to the new government? Is it a different world now?
I think it is a bit of a different world. I think that it is increasingly difficult for the Obama administration to make that claim, and it has a dangerous precedent for the international system more broadly, in that if the United States can say that the Pakistan government, despite all of its public claims, including those of its sitting prime minister to be against the drone strikes, if the United States can claim that secretly they're saying something different, then what's to keep any other government from using similar tools and saying that secretly they're being welcomed by their neighbors as well? So there's a problem of an international precedent here, and that's one of the reasons why I and others in Washington have thought that it's really time for a renegotiation of the situation on drones, on the deal on drones. We did seem to have a tacit acceptance by prior Pakistani governments, by the Musharraf regime as well. That tacit acceptance seems to have expired. That doesn't mean that drones would necessarily be ruled out. The United States will continue to use them when it thinks that they're in our supreme national interest. But it doesn't mean that I think the time for a new deal has come.
Okay, let's move on to Afghanistan, which is going to be in the next year a main bone of contention for Pakistan and the US. Dan, do you agree with the Prime Minister's claim in the past Afghans and the US have alleged that Pakistan's interfering, it's supporting Taliban groups? The Prime Minister says not so, they want peace in Afghanistan.
Well, I don't disagree that Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif wants peace in Afghanistan. But I would say that the standard view here in Washington that I share is that Pakistan has interfered historically, that Pakistan continues to have big stakes in Afghanistan and certain friends in Afghanistan, including Taliban groups that are based inside of Pakistan, namely the Haqqani Network and what is commonly known as the Quetta Shura or Mullah Omar's group. These are still seen as being based inside of Pakistan. And whether Nawaz Sharif says they have favorites or not, the United States is very strongly of the view that Pakistan could have done and should continue to do more against these groups if it intends to see real peace break out inside of Afghanistan.
Do you agree, Absar? Or you?
Well, this is a very complicated issue. U.S. keeps saying to Pakistan, do more, and Pakistan keeps asking, what are you doing inside Afghanistan where you are present so heavily and with so much resources? So I think this is a complicated situation. This is not just a button of a tap which Sharif government will just switch off and switch on. I think if U.S. is negotiating with those Afghan Taliban against whom Washington is asking Islamabad to do more, I think there comes the catch point, and then the Pakistanis start asking, why can't we support them? Because after 2014, you're talking to them after 2014 when you will be leaving Afghanistan. Of course, they will become part of that political process. But that said, Sharif has been very clear in his speech to the United Nations, and I think he was speaking his heart out. It was not just a political statement. He meant it when he said that he has conveyed it to Hamid Karzai, whoever comes to Afghanistan in power, they will support it. We don't have any favorites. Of course, we have a huge Pashtun population in Pakistan which wants Pakistan to play some role in ensuring the rights of Pashtuns in Afghanistan are not violated. But that doesn't mean.
Let's get Dan on one of the points you raised. Dan, U.S. wants to negotiate with the Haqqani group and other Afghan Taliban groups. Why shouldn't Pakistan be supportive of, well, they say they're being supportive of that effort, but why should be Pakistan fighting them when the U.S. is talking with them?
Right. I agree that this is a complicated issue, and I also agree that the United States has shifted its stance in recent years. I think the basic desire right now is for Pakistan, from a U.S. perspective, for Pakistan to play a constructive role, if possible, in getting those groups to come to the table and play a part in a future Afghanistan. But there's a great deal of skepticism here, as there is about negotiations with the Pakistani Taliban, about whether that can bear fruit. And so I think maybe it's important to recognize that, yes, the U.S. government is pushing that agenda, but there are a lot of people here, including myself, who question whether that agenda of talks with various groups of the Afghan Taliban will bear fruit, even though that is what the U.S. policy is right now.
So let me ask you this, and as for the Pakistani Taliban, a senior State Department official called it a long shot. So that's how confident they are about those talks. But the Afghan Taliban, if you're skeptical that they won't bear fruit, and a lot of people in Washington agree with you, what happens when the U.S. leaves in 2014? And why should Pakistan be fighting somebody that might be a major player in Afghanistan post-U.S. withdrawal?
Well, look, those of us who are skeptical about the talks are also skeptical about what Afghanistan will look like post-2014. We're very worried. I think there are people that there's good reason to be worried in the region as well. The United States has not acquitted itself as well as it might over the past several years. The war will continue. Some kind of political negotiation or settlement would be desirable, but precisely what that looks like, if it could be a big bang deal with the Afghan Taliban, That seems unlikely, but maybe negotiations can begin to peel apart some of the Afghan Taliban groups, can make some progress along the way in the context of a broader Afghan politics, including upcoming elections. Maybe there's something that can be done. Why the United States would want, or why I would want Pakistan to maintain some degree of a hard line on the Afghan Taliban is because I believe that they will ultimately be dangerous to Pakistan itself. And I think that, yes, Pakistan has to deal with the world that it's dealt with, the neighbors that it
Explain
has,
that,
but
Dan.
it has to make
Explain that.
deals.
Explain
Sorry.
it. How will they be dangerous for Pakistan?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that the links between Pakistani Taliban and Afghan Taliban are deep, that the Afghan Taliban in many ways have been playing a double game with the Pakistanis, just like Washington accuses Pakistan of playing a double game, that the Pakistani Taliban and the Afghan Taliban see certain alliances in their interests, and that the Pakistani Taliban have very directly attacked the Pakistani state. So it's difficult to see how they're not mutually, at some level, both enemies and allies of convenience to Pakistan. That's a dangerous game to play. You give them more space inside of Afghanistan, it may come back to bite Pakistan itself.
There might be a blowback. Absar.
Yeah,
Yes.
same is the situation on Pakistani side. You know, this is the problem with double games. Both sides are playing double games with each other, and people are suffering. Like the attack on the killing of a major general in Pakistan 2 weeks ago, that was the responsibility was taken by Maulvi Fazlullah, who is hiding inside Afghanistan, and Pakistan claims that Fazlullah is being supported by Afghan government. So they targeted. I mean, this is one of the biggest loss Pakistan has suffered so far in this war. And few days later, there was a terrible bomb blast inside a church in Peshawar, in which about 100 people got killed, including women. And in that horrible attack, the responsibility for that was accepted by Jandullah. Jandullah now is a group which is, according to some reports, according to some information, was supported by the United States against Iran. So, you know, this is such a complicated game, and both these attacks are targeted at sabotaging the negotiations between Pakistani Taliban and Pakistani government of Nawaz Sharif. So I think there is a double game on both sides, and people in Pakistan believe that US is also playing double games through these groups, so that they could torpedo the possibility of negotiations between Pakistani Taliban and Pakistani government. On the other side, Pakistani government is also feeling the same way, that if they could negotiate out of, say, 25 groups, if they could convince 20 or 15 to abide by the Pakistani constitution and lay down their weapons, then they will be in a better position to fight out the others.
The five. What is Pakistan's fear for Afghanistan post 2014?
Well, number one fear is that there will be a civil war in Afghanistan, and number two is that if the Afghan army, Afghan security forces, which have been erected by the United States and NATO, if they fail to control Afghanistan, you know, it will be free for all. And even politically speaking, if there are elections and you know, Pakhtuns are in majority in Afghanistan, so if Pakhtuns take majority in Afghanistan, that means these Taliban, they are all Pakhtuns. So Pakistan wants a political player there with their support to be there in the game, so that post 2014 it doesn't happen what happened when US took over Afghanistan post 9/11, when it was promised with Pakistan that Afghan soil will not be used against Pakistan by Indians, and US had guaranteed. This is what Pervez Musharraf told the whole nation when they accepted all those 7 famous conditions by the United States. Colin Powell gave those conditions. So Pervez Musharraf told Pakistani people that Kashmir issue will be resolved, Pakistan's economic problems will be taken care of, and in Afghan soil will not be used against Pakistan. But this just didn't happen, and now Afghan soil is being used against
feeling,
Pakistan.
as before, Dan, Pakistan seems to be feeling a deja vu kind of situation. US was in South Asia, left, forgot all about Pakistan and the Afghans living in Pakistan, and Pakistanis feel something similar might happen again.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a return to the past, certainly from Pakistani perspectives. To be critical of the U.S. government for a moment, I would say that the United States hasn't done much to convince Islamabad otherwise. It hasn't made a credible case about a long-term commitment to Afghanistan. It hasn't made a similar case about its partnership with Pakistan. And if anything, it has led with statements about rebalancing to Asia, which I think in Islamabad, as I understand it, are often seen as containing China and tilting toward India. So there's a lot of trouble in the post-2014 vision that the United States has put forward. From a Pakistani perspective, I can understand that. If I could just follow up on the Jandula issue, though, I would only say that while I have no evidence of a non-connection between Jandula and the United States, I also have no evidence that it was necessarily Jandula that pulled off the attacks. I think there are some questions being raised about precisely who actually did it. And I would also say that I haven't seen any
responsibility.
They have, but a lot of groups claim responsibility for things they haven't done. This happens routinely. My concern there is that I really see no evidence of the United States attempting to disrupt by such horrible tactics, that is killing of innocents at a church. The idea that the United States would be behind that, I simply don't believe is right. I don't think it's credible. I could imagine a situation where U.S. drone strikes, and I think this has happened in the past, where U.S. drone strikes have derailed nascent Pakistani negotiations with Pakistani Taliban. That's a different story, though. The idea that the United States would be in league with the terrorists.
I think you may.
I never said that U.S. is behind such attacks and U.S. using
Dan,
those tactics.
Yes, I think, let me explain. I think, Dan, what Absar meant was that these groups, just like Osama bin Laden at one time was trained by the CIA for a different purpose and later on turned against the U.S. itself, Jandula, what Absar meant was at one time helped by the U.S. against Iran. Now, and it may have been that they have no ties now, as you suggest, that
well,
they
that's
probably
fine.
don't.
I would say others in Pakistan have actually taken the issue further and have suggested that the United States really is in a game, a really very dangerous, what would be a dangerous and I think counterproductive game of using terrorism in that way. And I think it's useful to point out that I don't see evidence of it, and I don't think it's especially credible.
Okay, let's move on to a third issue that's going to be very important. The last time U.S. withdrew from Pakistan, the nuclear issue became huge because that was the bone of contention. That was why there were sanctions against Pakistan. Today, in his speech, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif said that Pakistan is a responsible nuclear weapon state. Dan, is U.S. buying that argument?
In a word, the answer would be no. Some of this is fair and some of this is unfair. On the fair category would be that Pakistan does have a documented history of proliferation. Dr. A.Q. Khan, seen as a centerpiece in a global proliferation network that extended to places like Libya, North Korea, Iran, and so on. So that history dogs Pakistan's claims of having a sterling record on nonproliferation. What is less fair is that in recent years, Pakistan has pretty clearly taken steps to secure its nuclear program. Some of those steps taken, I understand, in conjunction with, in cooperation with the United States, although limited cooperation. So Pakistan's record has gotten better. But I think to think that Washington, and in particular the U.S. Congress, would see through that to go so far as to grant Pakistan a similar status as it has granted India is very, very unlikely politically. Probably not an area where, if I were advising Prime Minister Sharif, where I would suggest he put a lot of emphasis.
What do you think, Absar?
Well, I think Dan has a point, but nothing has so far been established, no foolproof evidence has been given that Pakistan has been actively involved in nuclear programs of North Korea.
Khan admitted it on national TV.
I mean, that confession, was politically motivated. Then Pervez Musharraf was God in Pakistan. He forced him to admit.
Okay, so let me be the devil's advocate here. What Dr. A.Q. Khan later said was not that he did not proliferate. He said that he did not do it alone. He had the army behind him. So rather than going from one rogue person, we are now to a rogue institution here.
Again, this is claim and a counterclaim. Nothing has been proved so far. This is what my point is. As Daniel claimed about the Jindalal's connection with the United States has not been proved. So if this is proved and established that AQ Khan has been involved, of course this is nobody's going to defend it. But so far, as the situation is today, it has not been
But
proved.
it's not an anonymous group saying we did it, claiming responsibility. It's a nuclear scientist saying,
Right, but they,
I did it with the help of others.
To what extent? What was exchanged? What was sent there? What was the cooperation? What was the level of that cooperation? This has not been established. He just said that I was involved in some activities which were not in the national interest. This is what he said. He never said that I helped North Korea or Iran or Libya to build nuclear weapons or nuclear system. He didn't say that. He just admitted some activities which he, according to him and according to that time's regime, were not in Pakistan's national interest.
Dan, do you think America has enough evidence that it can hand over? It has. America says it has handed over stuff to General Pervez Musharraf, but something it can make public?
I think a number of things have been made public in terms of reports. You'll see international reports on their proliferation by non-governmental organizations that have gone through and documented some of the evidence, including evidence collected from, say, the Libyan nuclear program, which was subsequently wrapped up, that had designs, nuclear designs that pretty clearly bore the markings of a connection to Pakistan. So, I mean, leaving aside relitigating that history, I think the reality here is looking forward. Nawaz Sharif and Pakistan will have a very, very difficult road ahead if they intend to push the nuclear issue here in the United States. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't continue to make the case that Pakistan's program isn't going away and that its nuclear security has gotten better in recent years, because both of those things are true. The world will have to come to terms with Pakistan's program, but to do so in a way analogous to that the United States pursued with India, again, politically very unlikely. I would put in the category of just a non-starter here, just looking at Congress.
At least a non-starter for now. Pakistan may have to go for another decade of proving that it can go through non-proliferation.
I think that's right.
We're coming towards the end of the show, so let me move forward post-2014. From Pakistan's perspective, what does the region look like? And what does Pakistan-US relationship look like?
Uncertain on both counts. As I was just thinking about, first let's talk about Pakistan-US relationship. Pakistan does not have appointed any ambassador to the United States so far, although this government has completed almost 100 days now. Same was the case in Washington, D.C. After Richard Holbrooke, this post stayed vacant for so many months, and it showed that US is not any more interested in Pakistan, especially after Bin Laden's incident. So I think both sides need to sit back and think where they want to take their relationship, mutual relationship, to what stage post-2014. Because one thing is for sure, Pakistan is not going to trust the United States, especially what happened after first Afghan war. Pakistan has been suffering even today because of the...
So let me quickly go to Dan because our time's running out. Dan, quickly, from the US side, what does the region, South Asia and Pak-US relationship look like post-2014?
I would agree with the word uncertain. I would suggest that there is a way ahead, a more positive way, which is based on the idea of regional integration, which is based on something the United States is trying to do in the rest of Asia through investments in infrastructure and bringing other countries together in trade and transit. This is the kind of thing that could be a positive agenda for both the United States and Pakistan. It's not centered on terrorism. It's not centered on nuclear issues or other contentious matters. It's something that's mutually in both of our interests to bring Pakistan further into the wider region, economically especially, but also diplomatically. And I think that would be a starting point for a good post-2014 vision. It's not there yet, but I think it's something we could do.
Thank you so much, Dan. I'm sorry I have to interrupt. Our time's running out. I want to thank both our guests before we leave you. Absar Alam, senior journalist and analyst from Pakistan from Aaj TV. Daniel Markey from Council on Foreign Relations. And thank you for watching us. I hope you leave your questions, comments, suggestions on our Facebook page. Watch us, follow us on Twitter. For now, goodbye.